Fragrance in the garden is something I feel is often overlooked. The idea that our plants can not only be beautiful, but offer a sensory experience as well. We think about some of our scented plants that we're all familiar with, lilacs blooming in spring, our lilies in the summer, but you can have a progression of fragrance from spring all the way through fall with the appropriate selection of a wide range of plants. On our cover slide here, we have a datura called evening fragrance, which first and foremost is a poisonous plant. It's important to mention that. Knowing your plant is always important. But when this thing blooms at dusk into the evening hours, very sweet smelling and intoxicating in the garden. So engaging our sense of smell. Again, whether that's a primary goal or not in our gardens, it's something we can accomplish with beautiful plants, and that fragrance can be provided by a wide range of flowers and foliage. A combination of plants in our containers, our sunny borders, and even in our shady locations can offer just a wide range of scents that make the garden even more dynamic. Well, fragrance in the garden, first of all, scent is subjective. It's not fair to tell people you're going to like this smell or this is something you should strive for. We all have different feelings on flavors, as we do with fragrance. Scent intensity can differ as the day progresses and humidity and temperatures change. And scent is always over-dramatized in plant descriptions. Many times you'll see the tagline fragrant with an exclamation point, which might make it more interesting to purchase, but learn a little bit more about that fragrance, or better yet, take a whiff before you purchase. The image on the left is a holy basil, which has extremely fragrant leaves. So how is fragrance delivered? Well, some plants have fragrant flowers. I mentioned lilacs earlier. The upper right image in this slide has flowering tobacco, which is sweetly fragrant, particularly at dusk and in the evening hours. Many plants have fragrant foliage. When you think about our more common herbs, the lower right image, that's a Thai basil, extremely fragrant leaves. And many of our herbs run the gamut of having that fragrance, particularly with the foliage. Lavenders, rosemary, thyme. Consider creating rooms or spaces with varying scents. Having fragrance throughout the garden and in locations where it can be enjoyed close to the home. All too often, fragrance is again overlooked, and it's something that can help engage youth and children in the garden. So how do we maximize fragrance? Well, it's important to select spots that you'll be using out in the garden and position these fragrant plants accordingly. In the image on the left, that bench is positioned perfectly, and having fragrant oriental lilies in the background provides a wide range of sweet smells for a good 3 to 4 weeks when they're in bloom in midsummer. So consider the proximity of your fragrant plants, perhaps in a window box or a container near the back door, or along paths and in areas that you traverse in your backyard. Targeting scent from April through October is entirely possible, and perhaps consider night blooming plants, those that open up at night and emit a very sweet fragrance. These fragrances are meant to attract pollinators, but have the added benefit of being nice for humans as well. And focus on those plants that emit scent. Fragrant foliage is nice, but you have to have a tactile engagement that has to be engaged, whereas the emitters, the flowers that have fragrance, can be carried far and wide on wind currents. The herb garden at Rotary Botanical Gardens in Janesville has a wide range of fragrant plants and utilitarian herbs. So a garden that provides scent with a large focus on foliage, certainly with the majority of the herbs that I've previously mentioned. Many years ago, we planted a bed at the gardens that included all scented plants. So there's a wide range of fragrant annuals, fragrant perennials, and along this lower wall, we drape plants that would have a tactile engagement, fragrant foliage that can be engaged. And we put signs out there to let people know that they could enjoy these. So the fragrances that were represented here included vanilla, orange, lime, chocolate, a lot of sweet smelling flowers, as well as foliage that had varying scents. So that wide range can be achieved. The sign for our smelly garden, this was an installment at the gardens for 2 years, 2011 and 2012. It'll actually return in 2014. But the smelly garden, the intent was to engage people with these sensory plants. Not only that, but to explain why plants are fragrant. And it's not for humans. Ideally, many of our fragrant emitting plants, our flowers, are attempting to attract pollinators. Many of those plants with fragrant foliage have essential oils or contents in the leaves, in essence, that help exclude insect damage, and ultimately those same oils are what lend themselves to flavorings and other uses for these herbs. An image of that garden at Rotary Gardens with a wide range of plantings, and in the distance you see some containers lined up along some low walls. And we represented about 50 cents in those containers, so individuals could go along and rub the and take a sniff. Along the border of that garden, a wide range of plants again, with the attempt of trying to create a lot of fragrance in the garden, particularly in the evening as well. And this garden also included night blooming plants, and we had some outdoor activities during the evening hour. Enjoy those scents. The garden itself was ornamental as well, but with a wide range of herbs, ran the gamut of so many different fragrances, and it was nice to share those with people. The idea that plants can smell like chocolate or peppermint seemed really novel to many of our visitors. Another image of that garden. The intent with over 185 variety of plants was to have a segue of fragrant blooms throughout the season, but offer that foliage as well. The containers I mentioned earlier, here they are lined up along the low wall. And ultimately, it was nice to have people come along and enjoy these. Here's an image of one of the school groups going through the gardens. Late in the season, but still so many fragrances represented. Needless to say, this garden also had a wide range of pollinators. So when we talk about scent windows, the idea of when do these plants bloom, many of us start thinking about gardening in our Midwestern gardens from Mother's Day until September. Keep in mind that fragrance can be provided even earlier. The image there is fragrant hyacinths. You see a lot of white blooms emitting a great fragrance. This is an April shot, early May. This is actually at Keukenhof Gardens in the Netherlands, but ultimately was a wonderful selection for extending that scent window earlier in the spring. So hyacinths certainly are a great opportunity. These would be fall planted, so in October you have to have the thought that you're going to position these out in the garden for the fragrance that they'll emit. So getting them close to beds and borders, maybe even forcing some in containers might be worth it. As you segue into summer, you start to rely on many of the fragrant perennials. On the right, that image is of the stargazer lily, extremely fragrant. The window of bloom is 2 to 3 weeks in summer. So do consider the duration of fragrance and the timing. So the hyacinths I showed previously are already done blooming, they're finished up. The lilies start to take over the summer show, but many of our gardens we do seek a progression of blooms for ornamentality. You would do the same thing for fragrance as well. So remember that fragrance is the contribution of flowers, foliage, and sometimes both. Some examples of fragrant plants. Keeping in mind it's important to know your plant. I'm showing you plants that have fragrance, but you need to know ideally what siting they like, preferred soils, sunlight, the watering regime. So again, knowing how to keep these plants happy is important. So when I show Lily of the Valley can be a little aggressive, but boy, when it's in bloom, extremely fragrant flowers. There's also pink blooming varieties and variegated forms as well. So a utilitarian ground cover that has the benefit of strong spring fragrance. Another great perennial for fragrance is the peony. Some are more fragrant than others, some are not fragrant at all, but when you're purchasing your peonies, and you'll typically get those in fall, position them in an area where you'll know you'll enjoy those fragrant blossoms in late May into early June. This variety, Do Tell, is one of many that has a strong fragrance. This composition here, fragrant phlox or garden phlox in the center. You see some Rudbeckia in the back left of the image, some coneflower, so a great summer composition. And in this case, the summer phlox is carrying color. This is a shot in July into early August, but the fragrance that this plant emits is amazing, particularly at dusk. And there's a wide range of varieties. Here's the variety David, which is an award winner, very mildew resistant, and garden phlox should be selected for their mildew resistance, knowing that with a cool, wet summer, it's likely regardless. However, this is a variety that does have resistance and a strong fragrance. Keep in mind, white in the garden is important. This would be a great plant in the moonlit garden and offers a great coloration or color contributor for a good 2 months. One of my favorite hybrid phlox is this Mini Pearl. A little bit shorter in the 24-inch range, extremely fragrant. So here's a knee-high perennial, again blooming in, this is late spring into early summer, extremely fragrant flower clusters. So do consider that as an opportunity. Garden heliotrope or valerian, very fragrant vanilla scented blooms. And the image here would sell you on the plant. It's extremely beautiful when it's blooming in mid-spring. Into summer, the warning with valerian is it reseeds prolifically. So you'll have a patch of it and it'll continue to spread. Out east, it's actually been banned in some states because of its aggressive nature. But in an herb garden, there's very few perennials, hardy perennials like this, that have such a strong vanilla scent. And here's an image of a patch of valerian. We have it at Rotary Gardens, and every year we remove seedlings that have germinated a distance from the parent plants. Jupiter's beard, Centranthus ruber, comes in both pink, as you see in this image, and also white. Beautiful blue-green foliage, 24 to 30 inches tall, extremely fragrant flowers. Now this emits a fragrance, but you have to be fairly close to enjoy it. Keeping in mind flowers that emit a fragrance, some have a wider radius of appeal, as I call it, or a wider range, but remember what was mentioned earlier, that humidity, air temperatures, and the season may dictate the range of those. But this is a hardy perennial that should do well. The Cimicifugas or snake roots, extremely fragrant blossoms, although back to the comment about scent being subjective, I have some people say they enjoy the smell of this. Others say it smells like soap, and not in a good way. So with subjective fragrance on this, keep in mind this June to early July bloomer. Very tall spike-like flowers, but the fragrance might be questionable. That's something you'll have to determine. We love hostas at Rotary Gardens. We have a good 500 varieties or so, and we are focusing now on some of the later bloomers that are extremely fragrant. And many of your hostas have the smaller violet flowers. Some gardeners choose to deadhead hostas because the primary interest is really the foliage. Here's the variety Aphrodite. Not real exciting in terms of foliage. It's a green leaf hosta, but when those blossoms come out in early summer, extremely fragrant, and you can smell this a distance away. Aphrodite being one of the best varieties for fragrance. Seventh Heaven being another really nice hosta for strong fragrance. There's even purple coneflowers with fragrance. The variety Fragrant Angel is a nice white echinacea. I will mention that fragrance with coneflowers is very subtle. So again, here's one that might be promoted as fragrant, but you really need to have your nose pretty close to that to enjoy it. Our smelly garden in the previous years and coming up this year in 2015 will have a lot of lilies, including Stargazer. The intent with including lilies is strong coloration, and Stargazer being an extremely fragrant form. When you're focusing on lilies, focus on oriental lilies, or what are termed Orient pet lilies. These are hybrids between oriental lilies and trumpet lilies. The Asiatic lilies typically don't have a scent, but there's many other species of lilies that have a strong fragrance. You're planting these as perennials, so again, position them in areas where you can enjoy their summer fragrance. The variety Satisfaction that's shown here is one of my favorites, and this blooms at about 4 foot in height, and this is one of the Orient pet lilies, one of the hybrids, extremely fragrant, blooms for about 3 weeks in midsummer, and one of our favorites in our English cottage garden. The Regal Lily, we included about 500 of these in our scented garden, and the fragrance was amazing, extremely sweet, another midsummer bloomer, and one that's done quite well for us, offering white in the landscape and such a strong fragrance. Sweet Autumn Clematis. The Latin has changed on this a little bit, but the look is still the same. Keep in mind that this clematis is one that can be cut back severely in late fall into the winter, regenerates new growth, extremely vigorous. Bloom time is typically mid to late September and blooms for about a month into October. Extremely fragrant, a nice vigorous vine, full sun or part sun, and whether you train it or let it ramble, can offer late season scent. And when we talk about scent windows, this is one that can do quite well very late in the season. The image here shows Sweet Autumn Clematis at the Chicago Botanic Garden, allowed to go over a banister or railing. So very informal in its look, but offering fragrance in the Buehler Enabling Garden. And when we talk about herbs, one of the best herbs for showing the power of lemon, or lemon scent, is lemon balm. Being a mint family relative, extremely vigorous, so keep that in mind. But here's the gold form, all gold, strong lemon scent, can take full sun or part sun, offers gold in terms of a contribution in the landscape, but would benefit from some containment or being vigilant in terms of its spreading nature. Mint containment. This is an image from Olbrich Botanical Gardens in Madison, Wisconsin, and you're seeing some mint clumps. And what's a little hard to determine in this image is they're all put in metal containers. They're sunk in the ground so the roots can't run. These mints are contained by underground, again, metal containment, that metal extending a good 18 inches below grade and an inch above grade, so that mint can't go down and out or can't hop over the top of this container. One of the best ways to contain mint is seen here, because otherwise it just keeps going. Another mint family relative, here's Monarda. Jacob Klein is just one of dozens of varieties, but this is one of the best reds for a tall plant, 3 to 4 feet. Mildew resistance. Keep in mind, Monardas, similar to phlox, there are mildew resistant varieties, so do select those. But Monarda, very fragrant foliage, and again, that's its contribution in terms of the foliage itself. The blooms, incidentally, are attractive for a wide range of pollinators, including butterflies and hummingbirds. Back to some of the herbs. Smoky fennel. Beautiful look here, blooming with umbels of chartreuse flowers. The foliage has sort of a licorice flavor to it, or scent to it. And this is a perennial for us. Has beautiful dusky foliage and again a nice bloom. 3 to 4 feet. So it's an ornamental plant, again with the use of being brought into the kitchen, and certainly that foliage is engaging. Another bronze fennel is the variety Smoky. Here in an image combined with Chinatown celosia, a plume celosia. So the umbels of fennel, again, quite showy, and incidentally are also edible. The agastaches, or agastache as some call them, these are hyssops. Some are marginally hardy, it depends where you live. Most are hardy to zone 5, but will grow as an annual very quickly in terms of achieving height and bloom. Their contribution in terms of scent is strictly with foliage. This variety, Golden Jubilee, at 30 to 36 inches tall, beautiful blue blossoms. You'll have a lot of bees and other pollinators on these flowers as well. Another agastache, Desert Sunrise, blue-green foliage. This is topping out at 4 to 5 feet. So in southern portions of Wisconsin, in zone 5, it does quite well. Further north or in colder climates with tougher winters, probably wouldn't perennialize, but again, can be planted as an annual. The agastaches, there's so many varieties out there, and again, the foliage is the contributor. Lavender. Lavender typically will grow as a subshrub for us. It's really not a perennial. The intent, hopefully, with a mild winter and some decent snow cover, is that plant regenerates. But who doesn't like lavender? It's included in our soaps, a lot of different products, a wide range of uses. The trick is perfect drainage for growing it well in a full sun location. But that scent of lavender is provided by the flowers and the foliage. Back to some scented blooms here on woody plants. This is black locust, Robinia pseudoacacia. I will warn you that black locust tends to thicket in that it has root runners and occasionally seedlings, so be wary. I know in some other states there's some concern with this spreading, although it is a native plant. Along the roadsides, typically as you get into late May, early June, the Robinias will start to bloom and you'll see fragrant white clusters, very sweet smelling. This image is taken in my front yard where I have one that, when it blooms, fragrance can be detected 50 to 60 feet away. But again, be wary of its vigorous nature. Another fragrant woody plant. Here we have white fringe tree. Fragrant clusters of blossoms. There's actually a male and a female. Both will bloom. The females will also form some blue fruiting later in the season. But as an understory tree, typically getting 15 to 20 foot over a long period of time, this can take quite a bit of shade as well. So zone hardiness to the southern part of the state, might need a microclimate further north, but very shade tolerant again, and to have this contributing fragrant blooms in spring is amazing. The next image is a close-up of those fringed flowers. Very sweet smelling. We have 3 of these at the gardens, and they've done well for over 20 years now. Little leaf lindens. You know, a little warning with lindens. They're tough, they're beautiful. However, they are delectable for Japanese beetles. So keep that in mind, particularly little leaf lindens. This Tilia cordata, you see it here in bloom, extremely fragrant. And with lindens in bloom, the fragrance is emitted a great distance and attracts a wide range of pollinators, particularly bees. But again, there's different species of lindens. This one in particular has extremely fragrant flowers. Witch alders, or Father Gillis. This image shows the plant in bloom with these white bottle brush-like clusters. The flowers are fragrant. It's slightly sweet smelling. I wouldn't say these emit a great radius. You would have to get a little closer to the shrub to enjoy it. They are super tough in terms of once they get established, slow growing, but they also have the benefits of some great fall color. Here's a close-up image of the flower clusters. Very, again, sweet smelling, and the flowers are just finishing up as the foliage takes over. And it's a great shrub as an understory. It will take full sun or part sun. And once you get into October, you're rewarded with this beautiful fall color, this orangey red. And universally, most species will get and varieties will get a decent fall color. So here's a plant that really has 2 solid seasons of interest. I mentioned lilacs earlier for spring bloom. Don't neglect the fragrant viburnums. Here you see spiced bouquet, which is a Korean spice viburnum. These flower clusters. Now this is a close-up of a flower cluster, or a cluster of flowers that's about the size of a snowball. The intent here is emitting a great distance. So spice bouquet is one of dozens of varieties, with Korean spice viburnums getting typically 5 to 8 feet tall. Their fragrant contribution is usually in May, a good 3 weeks or so. The majority of viburnums also have a decent fruit display and fall color. This one will have a nice fall color, usually in very late October. Close-up of another great Korean spice viburnum. This is the variety Aurora. Same deal with what I mentioned previously with spice bouquet. This is another nice selection. There are also compact forms of Korean spice viburnum that get 3 to 4 feet or so. And here's the fall color of Korean spice viburnum. Again, typically peaking later in the season. Judd viburnums, another great fragrant viburnum, 6 to 7 feet, can take quite a bit of shade, also a wide range of soils, and also has a long bloom period, 3 to 4 weeks in spring, and it doesn't take many of these shrubs to perfume an entire area. And here's the fall color of that shrub. When you're dedicating space to any type of plant, you certainly want to get more bang for the buck, and maybe scent's a primary objective or even secondary. Regardless, know what other contributing factors or features your plants have. So when you're dedicating space, you know there may be a progression of interest and certainly a wide range of seasonal interest as well. A shrub a lot of people don't know about is this fragrant abelia. I will warn you, it's hardy to zone 5, needs protection in zone 4. It has the benefit of beautiful pink, light pink to white flowers in spring. This shot is taken in mid-May. These flower clusters will perfume an entire area. In fact, I think it's superior in terms of the radius of fragrance and the scent to the fragrant viburnums. The challenge is the hardiness. This image shows the form of the plant in bloom, arcing sprays of flowers in spring, so kind of an unkept mounding look. This isn't a plant you would shear or meatball or try to control. You just dedicate the space to it, and it'll fill in nicely. And here it is, the benefit of the fall color in October as well, an orangey red. So a lot of merit with the fragrant abelia. Summer sweets, clethra, here's Ann Bidwell. Fragrant flower clusters. The challenge with clethra, do a little research on these woody plants because they like wet soils and slightly acidic. So it's pretty rare for me to see a decent clethra. In fact, we've been challenged trying to grow healthy ones. I think a lot of it has to do with the pH, and you simply can't let them dry out. But these are summer bloomers. Ann Bidwell being a white with extremely fragrant flower clusters. These are in July. And here's the variety Ruby Spice with pink flower clusters. Majority of clethras will get 4, 5, 6 foot in time, but again can be extremely challenging in terms of keeping them happy. But talk about a nice summer woody. Mock oranges, Philadelphus. Mock oranges in bloom are wonderful. They're typically mid to late spring, universally white flowers, and an old-fashioned mock orange will perfume an entire yard. Unfortunately, with mock oranges, the bloom period is about 3 weeks, and then they fade off into the landscape and become just sort of a green mound. I'm not saying that's bad, but there are some great selections now of Philadelphus with interesting foliage as well that contributes from emergence in early May through the flowering period all the way till frost. Here's the variety EA Bowls, which is an old-fashioned variety, and you see its variegated look. The image on the left, there it is in peak bloom with white flower clusters, but the variegation offers a white look to this plant as well. And on the right, a little close-up of those fragrant blossoms, but then you see some of that great variegation. And here's the golden form, Philadelphus aureus, so golden foliage. So this plant is contributing gold to the landscape from spring all the way through fall, and has, of course, the scented blooms for 3 weeks in spring. We could do a whole talk on lilacs, but syringa, extremely fragrant. Your bloom time will fluctuate depending on how the spring is going and where you actually live. Usually a early May bloomer, and old-fashioned French lilacs, extremely fragrant. Keep in mind the maintenance of lilacs in terms of rejuvenation pruning is important. All too often we see real aged specimens out in the landscape that are looking a little rough around the edges. There's lots of developments in hybrid syringa, including very compact forms, and universally the fragrance is quite nice on the majority of these lilacs. Here's Little Boy Blue. This is a compact form, a French lilac that only gets about 8 foot tall, but look at those beautiful flowers. And talk about a cut flower that can be brought right in the home to offer some fragrance as well. Many of the old-fashioned roses also extremely fragrant. Jen's Monk is one of many. Many of the species roses have fragrance. Some of the hybrid tea roses. I think fragrance is often overemphasized or exaggerated with roses. So focus on some of the old-fashioned forms that have been around for a long time and have tried and true fragrance, keeping in mind all the inherent maintenance issues with roses, insects and diseases, and how much work you want to put into these. Regardless, picking hardy roses with fragrance and keeping them happy, they can be a great addition to the fragrant landscape. Wisteria as a woody vine. Well, wisteria first and foremost can be a little overzealous, can be quite vigorous as a woody vine. So appropriate support's vital. In this image, you see it over an arbor, a very, very strong support system at the Chicago Botanic Garden. Prolific being one of many varieties. Imagine walking under this and enjoying this fragrance in late spring, early summer. The variety Amethyst Falls. Beautiful selection, extremely fragrant flower clusters. This is a little more restrained in terms of growth rate, but also dynamite in the landscape. Wisterias do benefit from being cut back, and be wary, in terms of a woody vine, they continue to expand the diameter of their stems and trunks. So whatever structure they're growing up and over or on, they'll start to grab hold and really establish themselves. So again, a vigorous cutback. Fragrant seasonal plants. We're going to talk a little bit about annuals. And when I mentioned our smelly garden, we used a lot of seasonals. We peppered those through our landscape to offer not only a wide range of fragrance, but color through the season. So consider placing these seasonals, these fragrant plants, near your paths, doorways, windows, maybe in a window box or other containers. Consider peak timing for scent, whether that's a seasonal approach with, again, a progression of our bulbs, perennials, and annuals, or maybe our daily progression as well. The image on the right, that is Matthiola, or fragrant stocks. Extremely fragrant in spring. It's not a summer tolerant or heat tolerant annual, so it does very well in the front end of the season or the tail end, but doesn't like our summer heat. But the fragrance it can offer in an April and May container is tough to rival. The compositional use of fragrance. The idea that including fragrance in the garden doesn't have to be all or nothing. You can include a couple plants and insert them in your landscape because, number one, they may be ornamental as well, and hopefully that's the case, but can provide scent. In one of the borders at Rotary Gardens here, you see a lot of color. You see some violet painted obelisks or vining structures. Right in the center of that image is a chartreuse-leaved 4 o'clock. Fragrant blooms when they open in late afternoon. Very subtle fragrance, but it's one of those plants that does well, and in this case is a contributor to the color of the composition as well. So when you talk about containers, here's a cluster of 3 at the Chicago Botanic Garden with a wide range of early spring blooming fragrant plants, including some fragrant tulips. And that left container you see kind of a cluster of orange. That's wallflower. Extremely fragrant. There's Nemesia. There's some early phlox. Lots of great cold season or cool tolerant annuals. The intent being these containers have a different summer look, But instead of planting your containers in mid-May into early June for a summer appeal, you could be planting them in early April and having something like this to segue into your summer. So the utilization of containers for a seasonal approach or just locating fragrance in the garden makes sense. Understand all the needs of your containers in terms of drainage, appropriate soil preparation, and keeping those plants happy. I've already mentioned this cool season window. Here's a cluster of very fragrant plants, including some fragrant violas, more Mathiola or stocks. And this was a border at the Morton Arboretum that walking by it was so fragrant. But these are plants that are appreciating cooler nights and days in the 60s and 70s. It's when July and August hit that these plants would certainly not look like this. So consider again extending the scent window before summer by these. I've mentioned Mathiola a couple times, fragrant stocks. A great seasonal plant. There's a wide range that are available by seed. You'd need to start them early or purchase them to get them out in your earlier containers, but they will take cool nights and offer great sweet scent here on the edge of a container. Nemesias, here you see the variety Innocence Opal, quite fragrant. Again, a cool season annual, so it would never look like this in July and August, but certainly has this appeal in late April all the way through May into mid-June. Linaria, here's the variety Enchantment. You see a really bright violet flower with a yellow throat. This is another cool season annual, offering very subtle fragrance, but in this case offering a very vivid color in a season where we're already starved for color, but seeing this degree of coloration in a container or in the bed in late April, early May is dynamite. I mentioned wallflowers earlier. Here's Erysimum. This is the variety Citrona Orange, and it truly does have a light citrus scent to it. So wallflowers are very short-lived in our landscapes, and many are biennials. That's 2 years from seed to bloom. However, getting the seed started earlier and including them in your spring containers such as this can be an effective use. They will not bloom through our summers. Again, it's really a 2-month gig in spring. Another fragrant composition here with wallflower. That's the same Citrona Orange. And there's some dianthus. There's all sorts of other fragrant plants in this composition with a strong focus again on scent, in this case in May. Still talking about annuals, but summer annuals. Heliotrope. Now you're seeing 2 different heliotrope in this image. The upper left you see a dark violet blue, and then in the foreground you see a white. I'll talk first about the white heliotrope, which has the scent of vanilla. Heliotrope being a tropical, your best bet is to purchase it as a plant, and the bigger the better. Great for the sunny border or container, and you're rewarded with bloom clusters like that through the entire season. They emit a scent to a certain range, 5 or 6 foot from the plant, but very sweet smelling. Here's the variety Alba. This is what you just saw earlier. To include vanilla in the landscape, there are some other plants that have a similar scent, but this is a great summer annual, so do consider this. In terms of blue heliotropes, there's a lot of great varieties out there, but if you prefer blue in the landscape, do a little research to make sure you're picking a scented variety. This Atlantis still has the scent, and what my comment means is many of the newer varieties of blue heliotrope have no scent whatsoever or a lesser scent. So they've sort of gone full circle and tried to incorporate scent back into these newer varieties. So pick a blue that has scent. And here's a great example. The variety Simply Scentational certainly would be some wording that would let you know that this is one of the fragrant selections. Really with a lavender blue flower cluster. You'll get lots of pollinators on these, by the way, but the fragrance is dynamite. Still talking about annuals, flowering tobacco, Nicotiana. Now this is the woodland tobacco, Nicotiana sylvestris. These dangling white trumpets. The fragrance is primarily at dusk and into the evening hours. That fragrance being provided for moths as potential pollinators. What's nice is beautiful in terms of height, 5 to 6 foot in a single season. Do know your plants, because if these reseed, and they will, you'll have babies. You'll have to keep in mind that Nicotiana drops a lot of seed. As a side note, what we do with these is they peter out, these dangling clusters, as we start to see less blooms. Usually late July, we'll cut the plant down to the ground. We'll take that center stalk down, and in essence, severe deadheading, telling that plant to generate a new stalk, new flowers, and rewarded with later blooms and less seeding. So part shade or full sun for these, but keep in mind the height. Here it is combined with castor bean, and those castor beans are 5 to 6 foot in the back, but there's a maroon backing for these white flowers. If you're into enjoying the garden at night, these are great for that white coloration, which tends to glow, but also the evening scent is really unrivaled and something that should be included. Heaven Scent White. This is a Nicotiana elata, which is another very fragrant species. Not all species of Nicotiana, incidentally, are fragrant. So focus on Sylvestris you saw earlier, and Heaven Scent White is one of many that are in the 3 to 4 foot range with strong perfume. What I said earlier about heliotrope is similar in Nicotiana, that many of the new varieties have no scent. So make sure you research that if that's desired. Here's a variety Perfume White, and this Perfume series tops out at only 20 inches tall, has a wide range of flower colors. So you've now seen fragrant tobaccos in the 6 foot range, 4 foot, and now under 2 foot. Again, the white can look great at night. Or if you prefer purple, here's another in that same series, also equally fragrant. And there's Lime. So the Perfume series for more diminutive Nicotiana is available and out there. Very easy to grow from seed. Again, remember the fragrances are best at dusk and in the evening hours. Sweet Alyssum, this has been around forever. Lobularia, very easy to sow seeds. It's one of our longest blooming seasonal plants and will actually bloom through a couple frosts. So having it as an edger, in a container, a basket, a sunny border, lots of flower power, and many of the older varieties are extremely fragrant. They'll emit for a couple of feet in terms of a radius and are great along the edges of low walls where they can be enjoyed. But look for some of the old-fashioned white forms. And some of the new violet and pinks also have equal fragrance. So Alyssum is a very easy annual to grow. And again, the bloom period is a good 4 months out in our summer gardens. Creeping or summer phlox, these are an annual phlox. These are definitely not perennial. I will start by saying they won't bloom solidly through the entire summer. Your best months are June, July into August, and then they sort of wane, and you'll see scattered blooms. But to have this look here, Intensia blueberry, light fragrance, but most of the Phlox drumondii, which is the species, there's a wide range of seeds offered and vegetative offerings, those that are produced via plant division or excuse me, plants. Tissue culturing. But this Intensia blueberry is one of many varieties that offers light fragrance along a low wall or in a container. Here's Sugar Stars. Looks like a tie-dye painting. Also light fragrance. You'd have to be fairly close to enjoy the sweet smell of these. Again, over 3 months in the summer. Dianthus. Now, Dianthus barbatus refers to Sweet William, which typically in the past has been a biennial. That's 2 years from seed to bloom. However, many of the hybrid Dianthus barbatus now can bloom in the first year from seed if they're started early enough in the greenhouse. Noverna purple you see here combined with Alternanthera, extremely fragrant flower clusters, and it's really interesting to see the developments in first year flowering, fragrant hybrid Sweet William. So keep that in your palette in terms of a nice annual that'll bloom the length of summer. And here are some trials at the Ball Seed Trial Garden in West Chicago, Illinois, running the gamuts of pinks and reds and whites and bicolors. And it's really, truly amazing to see how many new varieties are coming out. And the fragrance is nice in the full sun garden. Here's the variety Sooty, which is dark maroon. And these flower clusters are really sharp. This is a true biennial. We have a patch at Rotary Gardens that just keeps regenerating itself and has a combination of second-year plants blooming and first-year plants with just the foliage. So it's constantly replenishing itself by dropping seed. This variety, Dash Crimson, is one of the hybrids. So again, has the benefit of fragrance, will bloom in the first year, and typically 18 inches in height, which is good for the mid part of the sunny border. When you talk Dianthus, look into carnations. Here's Fandango Purple Picotee. What's nice about this is it has a bicolor of nice white frosted edge, nice fragrance, great as a cut flower. So when you talk about carnations in terms of seasonal Dianthus, the drawback might be it takes a while for them to bloom, but ultimately top-notch in terms of fragrance. And here's a cluster of different Dianthus caryophyllus. Again, these carnations, blue-green foliage, nice flower clusters. Many of the old-fashioned varieties have a lot stronger fragrance, so keep that in mind. Here's Mattia. This is a seasonal that's in a lot of our seed catalogs, but a lot of people don't grow it. If you look closely, it's a beautiful flower with a 2-inch diameter daisy. And look at the flower petals. They branch out into 3 lobes. Extremely sweet smelling. Doesn't get over 2 feet tall, and would be great in a cut flower arrangement for fragrance. And a strong bloomer through the summer. Clidanthus arabicus, which this is called crisscross plant because of the arrangement of the stems, but very lacy foliage. Low to the ground, under 18 inches, but a lot of sweetly fragrant blossoms throughout the course of midsummer all the way till frost. I like it for its foliage texture, but the blooms are also beautiful as well. Trachelium. This annual, it runs typically whites, there's blues and purples. Glossy foliage, and here you see these wispy flower clusters. Fragrance is subtle, I'll have to tell you that, but bloom time, a good 2.5 months through the summer. Very heat tolerant, and it'll continue to regenerate blooms. Fragrant Scabiosa. This is a seasonal scabiose, which there are some annual pincushion flowers. Black Knight is a true seasonal, very fragrant, intensely sweet flowers. Black Knight is a variety, of course, you see here with really dark flower petals, but there are blues and whites and a lot of other varieties. Scabiosa atropurpurea, this fragrant species, usually will top out at 24 to 30 inches and is great again in the full sun garden. Popcorn plant, or popcorn cassia. This has been extremely popular at rotary gardens. This is a tropical for us, and it has a strong bloom period in midsummer and then gets a strong rebloom very late in the summer. What's nice is the beautiful blue-green foliage on a plant that for us will get 6 to 7 foot in a season. These flowers, if you look closely, the tighter buds that haven't opened on the top, if you were to rub those and smell your fingers, smells like buttered popcorn. Some people will say peanut butter, but I think I disagree with that. Regardless, both the flowers and the foliage are fragrant. And this is a novelty plant that I think can encourage children and also looks so good in our full sun tropical gardens. Here's another image of that same plant. If you look on the right image, there's a bee coming in for a landing. So also nice for pollinators. Tough to overwinter. We've tried many ways of doing it, but from a new plant in spring, 12 inches high, we keep it happy with water, fertilizer, good soil. Again, 6 to 7 foot of growth and a bloom time of close to 4 months. And a great image of some kids enjoying these plants. We donated some to a local school, and here's 5 potential gardeners who are realizing that plants can smell like popcorn, which is a connection that might make them a little more interested in getting outside. And there's the use of popcorn plant in our scented garden a couple years ago. And you see the predominance of these yellow flower clusters, but very interesting foliage as well. Have seen no insect or disease problems. Chocolate cosmos. So here we're starting to include the scent of cosmos. Now this is a cosmos that actually grows from a tuberous root. So if you buy it, you might get it as a plant, or you might order these tubers and start them in containers yourself. We plant 50 or 60 of these in our scented garden. There's not a lot of flowers, to be honest. It won't just be covered with flowers. What you see in that image is about what you'll get. But here a close-up of the blooms. If you get close to that and take a good whiff, it truly smells like chocolate. And when we had our scavenger hunt out in this garden, the kids really enjoyed commenting on how plants can smell like chocolate. Still on the chocolate theme, here's Berlandira laurata. This is a chocolate daisy, also very strong in terms of chocolate scent. Lots of daisies through the entire summer, and 24 to 30 inches tall. Usually a little shorter than that. Here's an annual called Sweet Sultan, or Centaurio moschata, the variety of the bride. Extremely fragrant. In fact, I would rank this as one of our most fragrant plants. Really needs good drainage and nice soils to do well. And you can find it in pinks and some other colors, including blue. We like this pure white form that tends to be extremely fragrant and also looks good at night in the moonlit garden. This variety, incidentally, is in most seed catalogs. Now, brugmansias. Now, going back to our first image, I mentioned a datura and that being poisonous. Brugmansias, also poisonous, very closely related. Those dangling trumpets of blooms, though, extremely fragrant. And for us, brugmansia, certainly not hardy. Some people will overwinter these inside or in greenhouses, and they'll keep achieving size. But what's nice is the continuation of these dangling fragrant blossoms through the entire summer. You can get a wide range of colors, and ideally being able to walk close to these is best. Their fragrance is ideal at dusk or through the evening hours. And here's a white form trained onto some supports. So you're walking under an archway here with dangling white brugmansia, and the fragrance was overpoweringly sweet in a real good way. Here's the same datura you saw in the first image, evening fragrance. Keep in mind another common name for this plant is Jimson weed. This has poisonous seeds. In fact, the entire plant is poisonous. So if that's a concern in your garden, do keep that in mind. But here's a fragrant plant that opens up at dusk and can perfume the evening garden. Still talking about evening bloomers, a little segue. These are all still seasonals. Ipomea alba, the moonflower. These plants actually will spiral open and offer fragrance in the evening, each flower only lasting one evening. But the next day, you'll see spiral buds, and as dusk descends, they'll spiral open, and the fragrance is unbelievable. Starting these earlier from seed in a container is the way to go, because it takes some time for them to go from seed to bloom. A lot longer time than most standard moonflowers, or morning glories, excuse me. Evening stocks, Matthiola. This is an evening bloomer. In fact, these little flowers open up at night, look like white confetti. Their intent is attracting pollinators, but they also will intrigue us because of a sweet scent. So incorporating these along, say, an outdoor porch or in a container where, let's say, you're sitting out in the evening garden, out on your deck, these will offer a sweet fragrance. Here's another image of that same Matthiola. Also offered in most seed catalogs, but underutilized in either the white or the fragrant garden. So you really have to have a commitment or currently enjoy your garden in the evening. Otherwise, you're missing the best part of what these plants are offering. Mirabilis longiflora. This is, in essence, an evening 4 o'clock. This is something that'll bloom late in the evening. Extremely fragrant blossoms. Not real exciting in terms of flower power. But if you look at this image, look how long the throat is on those plants. In its native tropical haunts, the intent of that is it's pollinated by a moth that has a proboscis that can reach all the way down through that for pollination. So this Mirabilis longiflora, extremely fragrant and one of the great plants to include in your evening garden. This is a mouthful, Zaleuzianskaya capensis, or night phlox. Beautiful, very small flowers. This is a close-up. The diameter of those flowers, by the way, is only about an inch. They truly only open at night, and you can catch an image like this maybe early in the morning before they shed or close, but very fragrant in one of those plants that does well in our hot summers. It's not a plant you notice from a distance because of the small flowers. It's one that if you incorporate it throughout your garden and you're outside in the summer months, you'll enjoy it. Here it is opening, and if you look closely, you see sort of a maroon fist, and you can see the backs of the petals are maroon. So the flowers, albeit quite small, are extremely exquisite, and it's amazing how much scent will come out of these. Still talking about tropicals in the landscape, fragrant tuberose. Now these are plants that we obtain as bulbs. We're ordering good-sized bulbs that are a little smaller than fist size, and we're starting these in pots early on. So we're actually potting them in 4 to 6 inch pots in late March, letting them warm up and start to grow. And when we're setting them out in late May, early June, they're already about a foot tall. These bloom very, very late in the season. So you have the benefit of starting them early so you can be rewarded with these fragrant clusters late in the season. This image, you see some blue behind this Mexican single polyanthes, and that's Russian sage. So you're looking at right now late July into August where this one is blooming. We try to get these out in the garden for very late summer, and they'll bloom well into late September. So Mexican single is one variety. Here's another, the pearl, and this is a double fragrant tuberose. So double the petals, equal fragrance, Both of these, both Mexican single and the pearl that you're seeing here, with beautiful pink buds that open to these extremely fragrant white flowers, will be 3, 4, even 5 foot tall. Might require some staking, but again, the benefits of starting these bulbs earlier and incorporating through sunny spots in your garden, they're truly amazing, and it doesn't take many of these to perfume an entire area. So here's a case of probably one of the strongest emitting, sweet-smelling seasonals that I'm going to show you today. Acidanthera or peacock orchids, also extremely fragrant. We purchase hundreds and hundreds of these as bulbs in spring. We'll also stagger the planting of these in containers, meaning we pot them up in the winter months, late March, early April, but we'll plant, say, 100 one week, 100 the next week. So we stagger the planting of, say, 500 of these over 5 separate weeks. And what happens is we have different maturity on these plants that we then put out in the garden in late May, early June. So what we've done by staggering the planting of the bulbs is we've staggered and extended the bloom time. So instead of having 500 of them bloom at once, if they had been potted at once, 100 are taking over for the next 100, and we have an extended period of interest from midsummer all the way till frost. Regardless, these are a dime a dozen, beautiful orientation in terms of the flower, 24 to 30 inches tall. Eucalyptus, eucalyptus, there's so many that are native to Australia, they become huge trees. We use eucalyptus as filler in our containers because of this steely blue-green foliage. The majority of eucalyptus also have very fragrant foliage. Now, you have to rub the foliage to smell it, but it's a kind of a strong citrusy menthol smell, but ultimately can be a contributor both visually. Here you see that silver really popping out of the composition, but also that fragrant foliage. Back to herbs that we've talked about earlier, certainly something like sweet basil. Here you see in a composition, extremely fragrant. The flowers are also fragrant, but if you're growing basil for culinary use, don't let them flower. You want to pinch the flowers off and encourage more foliar growth. And the idea is this could be easily accessible out in your home garden or in a container for instant use in the kitchen, but also the benefit of the smell of sweet basil. Really, really top notch. Think about going to the grocery store and you're out of basil or you don't have basil. You're paying $3 or $4 for that little plastic container of what they term quote unquote fresh basil. Being able to pick it right out of the garden is what I term as fresh. But love the fragrance of basil, and certainly an ornamental edible. Here's the variety Dark Opal. Can be used just like a sweet basil, but here that glossy deep maroon foliage really pops out of this composition with a lot of chartreuse. Years ago, we did a sweet basil collection, or a basil collection in general, with about 80 varieties, and felt this sweet Petra Dark had the darkest coloration. Also can be used as a sweet basil, so do a little research on the varieties that are out there. Whether you go with a traditional green Genovese type sweet basil, there's some very beautiful dark leaf basils that can be nice in the container or in the composition, but have an equal utilitarian use in the kitchen. Magical Michael, seen here, is a Thai basil, and some of the basils, particularly the Thai basils, have beautiful flowers. Now, you might be growing it for the foliage, which is fine, but these are typically used also as bedding plants. Lots of flower clusters. The leaves can still be utilized culinarily, but the intent here is a bedding plant approach in the full sun garden. And here's another real neat one, relatively new, called Oriental Breeze. You can see extremely dark flowers coming out. If you're growing it again for strictly leaf use, you can cut those flowers off, but I think they're wonderful contributors in terms of ornamentality. So the wide range of basils, go through any of your seed catalogs and you'll see 50, 60, 70 varieties of basil easily. And usually they'll give some culinary recommendations based on the type, whether it's lemon basil, cinnamon basil, Thai basil, and just so many sweet basil opportunities. This variety, Pesto Perpetuo, this is a variegated tall Greek basil. Has actually a slight citrus flavor to it. Can be used culinarily, but what's nice about it is the variegated foliage along with the form of this plant. And you see an upright form, an ovoid, sort of an egg shape on end. That's its form. It has a beautiful tight look to it. We use it out in the garden strictly as an ornamental, but again, you could be using it in the garden as an edible, but in terms of fragrance, quite nice and really beautiful in the landscape, particularly when repeated. And here's an image of that repetition in our sunken garden, where we've let this row of 7 or 8 of these really create a nice little formal look. So a beautiful basil, equal use in terms of culinary appropriateness. Don't ever neglect pelargoniums or scented geraniums. Not typically selected for blooms, and if you get some blooms, they're usually a kind of a loose pink look to them. There's very fine cut leaf forms, variegated forms, more felty leaves. They run the gamuts of smelling like nutmeg, orange, lemon, a wide range of different citruses. There's chocolate. I believe, by the way, chocolate pelargoniums, I don't think smell anything like chocolate, but that's for you to decide. But the scents go on and on with these. And tactile engagement, you have to rub them, but it could be great in a container. And back to our smelly garden, a lot of those containers that we had lined up side by side had a complete collection of scented pelargoniums. Here's the variety peppermint. This truly smells very strongly like peppermint. So again, pelargoniums are great as long as you can consider that their emission of scent is provided by our fingers. Oreganos, here's Sale's Choice, which is a trailing oregano. Wide range of oreganos, and when you think about traditional herbs, the scent of oregano is of course nice, but this might be something you include in your summer garden for its purpose in the kitchen. I'm going to show you 2 other trailing oreganos, typically not having a culinary use because there's so many other better varieties for that, but these lend themselves to the container because of their cascading form. The fragrance of the foliage is very oregano-like, but again, there are some better culinary varieties. But think of the potential of these scented plants spilling out in over containers. There's Kent Beauty. Here's a variety Amethyst Falls. Here's Softening a Rock Wall. There's another trailing oregano in a container, but I want to point out the golden variegated plant. That's a garden sage. You think about your spice rack. Sage, you don't use sage a lot. Some of you might. It's used to flavor meats and cheeses and has its use in the kitchen, but there's some very beautiful forms out there. So this aurea certainly could be used in a culinary fashion. Very fragrant leaves, but in this case is used as an ornamental for its foliage. 18 to 24 inches. This and the next couple of salvias I'm going to show you are hardy to zone 5. We typically plant them as a seasonal, although they may overwinter on occasion, but think of their impact in terms of a foliage contribution, both with color and fragrance. One of my favorite varieties is this Bergarten, very silver in its appearance, extremely silver, very tomentose, very furry as well. So it captures a lot of light. This is also a plant we recommend for the evening garden because of that silvering, but also can be used in the kitchen. If you prefer a little hint of purple, here's the variety Purpurea. All the same merits of what you saw earlier. And this variety Tricolor with hints of cream and green and purple. Not as vigorous as some of the other selections, but a great container candidate. And it has equal fragrance and also kitchen use. A close second place for lemon fragrance is lemongrass. This is actually one of the most commonly used herbs worldwide. It has a strong use in Asian culture. For us, a grass with not a lot of interest except for the scent, but including it in our summer gardens certainly will provide scent and also has uses in the kitchen. Another great one for kids. Here's lemon bergamot. Beautiful flower clusters that'll attract a wide range of pollinators. Also lemon-scented foliage. This is not hardy for us. This would be a seasonal. There's some great varieties out there, but they bloom really nonstop through the season. And we'll get 18 to 24 inches tall. Again, dynamite fragrance. Going back to herbs a little bit here, dill. Another seasonal plant. Fresh dill in the garden, whether you're using it for the foliage or the edible flowers or ultimately the seeds. Very fragrant foliage, and that smell of dill in the garden some people really enjoy. Incidentally, if you're into landscaping for pollinators, dill is a larval food source for swallowtail butterflies. So getting some fennel and dill out there, you might see some caterpillars, but that's all right if your intent is to provide the larval host plant for those butterflies. Regardless, a very fragrant plant in the scented garden. Here's a variety fernleaf. Most standard dill will get 3 to 4 feet tall. Fernleaf is a compact form. Here you see in bloom with beautiful umbels, 24 inches tall, so a little more compact in its appearance. Parsleys. You know, a fresh sprig of parsley, great seasoning here you see at Rotary Gardens in our herb garden. There's an assortment of curled parsley and flat leaf parsley all jumbled together. Great as a fresh cut herb. Also that clear fragrance of fresh cut parsley as well. And this is a tough plant in our summers and can continually be cut back and utilized. So fragrance in the garden. This is an image actually of my younger daughter who's about 15 years older than what you see here, but here she is with Grandpa smelling some fragrant tulips. The idea of engaging our senses in the garden. When we talk about sensory gardens, certainly the visual component's nice. The idea of offering a garden that appeals to our five senses certainly should include fragrance and scent. And through proper selection of plants and the proper siting and location of these plants to keep them happy can create a progression of fragrance again through our growing season. Here's some of our volunteers at Rotary Gardens. You know, the onus on us is to create future gardeners. You saw the image earlier of kids smelling the popcorn plant. Getting them out and getting them dirty and having them plant and enjoy the fruits of their labor, whether it's vegetables or fragrant plants or any type of plant. Keep in mind growing that next generation of environmentalists and land stewards and gardeners is vital. And fragrance might be one of the great tools to get these kids interested in getting outside. Another image of the gardens. Again, here's our helper who she's only 18 months old here helping plant. They're never too young to get them started. Some brief information on Rotary Botanical Gardens. I've done a gardening blog for about 7 years now. The link is on the screen. What I like to do is feature what's blooming, what's happening during the growing season. I include information on events and our volunteers. And during the winter months, I like to do little exposés on different plants. It's an outreach tool that hopefully will bring people to the gardens and realize that our mission is education, and that's just one of the vehicles for doing so. The next image is one of our annual beds a couple years ago. Includes our website, which is extremely active. It includes upcoming educational events, information on the history of the gardens, and hopefully will entice you to revisit or come and visit for your first time. Here's an image of our gazebo garden. Our 20-acre garden on an old sand and gravel pit over the past 25 years has developed very quickly. And again, we're an educational resource that relies on visitation, but ultimately people enjoying what we're doing in terms of gardening, whether it's sensory plants, edible plants, beautiful plants, letting people know that plants are an important part of our lives and will always be so. With that, I'll say thank you for your time, and hopefully you found the presentation insightful.